All right, it looks like this is online, so it looks like we're live and everything. And hopefully this has gone along with the link that I gave everybody. So I just want to make sure that that's working and that that's you know that's actually going to go. So let's see if we're here. And,
when we think
yeah, it looks like maybe.
We tend to think of the animals of the critique.
All right. Yeah,
That's
yeah,
actually
cool, right
right.
on. So I'm here. Perfect. Okay. All right. Sorry, I just want to make sure that everything's working. So the easiest way to do this, we'll just continue doing what Tom was doing before, which is that if you guys have questions here, just go ahead and tweet them and use the hashtag APGovWin, and that and that should make everything work. So I think I can put this up on the screen so that we can see what's going on. Although I'm not even sure exactly how I used to do this, because it's been a little while since I've done it. But no, that's not what I want. I just want. They've changed everything too much. All right, whatever. So if you do hashtag APGovWin, or if you tag me, then I should be able to answer the question here. So I'm going to look here and see what's going on. In terms of questions, I guess there are also questions on the channel here. So, oh boy, this is all old stuff. Okay, so Emma says, hey, this AP Gov has me stressed to the max. Hey, the key is don't let that happen. I mean, don't let the stress get to you. Some stress is good, and it'll give you sort of like that energy to kind of keep going and kind of get excited and do well. But you don't want to get to the point where you're sort of hyperventilating into the exam, because that just doesn't help anybody. If you're scared of the exam, then it's gonna win. And if you aren't scared of the exam, if you're confident in your own knowledge, then you're gonna win, and that's gonna be a whole lot better situation, to be honest with you. It's just gonna be far better than if you're trying to do that. Okay, so I'm getting some questions about the main difference between fiscal and monetary policy. And really, there's a very simple difference. Fiscal policy is going to have to do with how money is spent. It's going to be taxation. It's going to be military spending. It's going to be, any sort of policy about how the American government spends its money. Monetary policy, though, is going to be slightly different. That's going to have to do with currency and how the currency is valued, interest rates, and those sorts of things. Typically speaking, you're not going to see anything on the exam, in my experience, that's going to ask differences between those two things. If you are, it's going to be a very basic multiple choice question that will, say something along the lines of, which is an example of fiscal policy or something like that, so it's pretty basic stuff. Let's see, 527s and PACs. Aaron, we've done that a little bit, so I'll just give you the real quick and dirty on this. PACs are political action committees. They're created by interest groups in order to donate money directly to campaigns or directly to candidates. And the money goes to help those people get into office or, campaign for office. 527s were created in an effort to try and pull back the power of political action committees. And so 527s were created to be these groups where they couldn't directly donate to or even directly support a candidate, but they could make contributions for what were termed as issue ads, so a 527, for example, could make an ad that was, pro immigration enforcement, or something like that. But they got themselves kind of like, they came onto the scene as being really big in the 2004 election, when this 527 called the Swift Boat Veterans for Freedom, Swift Boat Veterans for America, sorry, started making a series of television ads and airing them quite regularly that were attacking John Kerry, the Democratic presidential candidate. So they weren't really campaigning with or for George W. Bush, but they were campaigning against John Kerry. And so they really, they were credited with perhaps being sort of like the swing factor in those in that election. So hopefully that helps as we go along there. I'm trying to pull up some different things because I'm getting, boy, a whole lot of inundated things. Okay, let's see, third parties. Katie, really with third parties, what you want to understand is, first of all, why they can't really get a foothold in the two-party system, and number two, like, why they even exist. So the things that kind of prevent them from getting power is that the system's kind of against them. We have a system of what are called single member districts. In other words, like, there's a district, a congressional district, for example, and like there's one person, there's, one representative. And so in order for a third party, whatever the third party would be, the Green Party, Libertarian, whatever, they would have to beat out both the Democratic and the Republican candidate in that district, which is very, very, very difficult. In addition to that, you have winner take all elections, which means that, like, when you're electing for this, like, there's nothing for second place, and there's certainly nothing for third place. Like, you don't get these consolation prizes. Many European countries will have this system of proportional representation, which allows third parties, if they get percentages of the vote, to get small percentages in like parliaments and things like that. But we don't have that here. And so third parties have a hard time, and an almost impossible time, of becoming major parties. So the question is, like, why? Third parties really are an outlet for people. It's a positive way to express a political dissent with two major parties, without taking to the streets and like starting to shoot people. You can put people up for office, you can run them. They're not going to win, but you can get your sort of like political energy out on this. But third parties can also make a real difference in elections in really two ways. Number one, they can swing elections, and in really, really tight elections, a third party candidate could swing it. And the classic example that you're going to see is the election of 2000, where George W. Bush and Al Gore were going head to head for president of the United States. It came down to Florida. It was one state was sitting out there, like, boom, whoever won the state of Florida won the election, became the president, leader of the free world. Yippee skippy, you get the whole, the whole prize. Well, there was another party involved there, and that was the Green Party. And the Green Party, throughout the country, but also especially in Florida, which is really where it mattered, got a lot of votes. And they got their votes from liberal voters who would have probably otherwise voted for Al Gore. Well, long story short, Al Gore ended up losing Florida, losing the presidential election, and George W. Bush became president of the United States. And a lot of people sort of like blamed that loss on the Green Party. The other thing that they can do, though, is they can bring up issues in elections that maybe the major parties don't want to take on yet. And they bring them into the spotlight, and if they gain traction, typically one of the two parties is going to incorporate. They're going to like grab the issue, and they're going to say, okay, well, now we're going to take this on, meaning that the third party is going to disappear, and they're all going to go back to the party which they probably originally were starting from anyway. So third parties have their place, but they have a very hard time making a real difference in terms of policy and elections and those sorts of things. Let's see. Haley wants me to go over to interest groups, media, and groups like the NAACP and their role in elections. Holy moly, Haley, that is a huge question. Whew. How about I just stick to the NAACP as a part of this? Interest groups like the NAACP, which have large membership and can garner a real support, have a lot of power in elections and also in policy making. If the NAACP comes out and says that one of the candidates has made a remark which is a racist remark, then that's going to affect the way that a lot of people see them. I mean, the NAACP really is a very, very legitimate organization. And so there's a lot of people who are going to be listening to what they say. And if they come out and say this, I mean, the candidate has got to respond to this. And so they can influence elections that way. They can also influence their elections. They can also influence elections by supporting a candidate. Interest groups can support candidates, and interest groups can lobby candidates and say, like, hey, we'll support you openly, and we'll bring a lot of voters your way if you publicly come out and endorse this and say, like, you're going to do this, and this. And so they do have a big effect in elections and that sort of things. Let's see. Coolio's asking about the different White House structures, circular, etc. I don't really think you need to know anything about that, to be honest with you. I've never seen it on an AP exam that I can think of. That doesn't mean it's not going to show up, but basically the big idea is that presidents organize their White Houses the way they like to run things. Some people like a whole bunch of people that sort of come to them, and they like hearing a lot of different opinions, and they make their decisions based on that. Others prefer kind of like a hierarchical thing where, they've got a chief of staff or somebody who's going to limit, people's access to the president. Like Nixon was really, really infamous for this, in that like it was really hard to actually talk to Nixon, but you'd get through to him through his hierarchy that he had sort of built up. So people organize this just like anything else. Donald Trump has organized his White House in the same way it seems that he's organized his businesses, in that he encourages people to fight amongst themselves in order to come out with like the best solution of something. So it's just about how you like your business to run. Let's see what we got here. A lot of stuff about Supreme Court cases and things like that. People, I think, get a little bit too carried away with the Supreme Court case thing. There's probably about 10 that you really are going to have a shot. I mean, you're really going to be confident will show up on the actual exam. Tom mentioned earlier Marbury versus Madison, McCulloch versus Maryland, Gibbons v. Ogden, Brown versus the Board of Education probably will be on there. Likely that Gideon v. Wainwright, which gave people the right to an attorney and incorporated that part of the Bill of Rights, is probably going to be on there. Citizens United will probably be on there, which sort of took away some of the restrictions on campaign finance spending. Others will show up, but there's no real like pattern that you can see. And I'm probably missing a couple, but there's no real pattern that you can see outside of it. And it's the really big ones. If they start to get a little bit more obscure, then they'll oftentimes give you a hint as to what the Supreme Court case is about. So look for that. Let's see. What are we looking for here? What is important to know about voter turnout and demographics? I would say that, gosh, that's a tough one. Voter turnout, I mean, the number one thing to know there is simply that voter turnout's really low in the United States. It's tragically low from a political science standpoint. And so, And so you definitely need to know that. Will it line up with demographics? They tend not to ask those questions, I think. And I don't want to venture guesses at why they don't do that, but they tend not to sort of like try and draw parallels between voter turnout and demographics, unless they're going to give you like some sort of a chart that has those things, and then we'll ask you to sort of interpret the chart. But in that case, you got a chart in front of you, so you can start interpreting that itself. Let's see. Gosh, my Twitter feed is way behind here. Let's see what we got that's sort of recent here with the people who are still on here. Let's see. We've already gone over the standing conference joint committees, those sorts of things. You can just look back at Tom's thing. I talked about those for quite a while. Really, you just need to know the definitions of those committees. And standing committees are the most important ones because they're like kind of always there, so that you can see it. Noah Keith has a question of what's a good way to review the importance or remember the later amendments. Okay, so I'm assuming by later you mean anything after like the Bill of Rights. It's a good idea. I mean, I guess if you have a little bit of time on your hands tomorrow morning, look over the amendments, but I would definitely know the 14th Amendment, the 15th Amendment. 14th Amendment is citizenship for freed slaves. 15th, and then of course the whole incorporation doctrine and all of that we talked about earlier. 15th Amendment has to do with voting rights for African Americans, males. The 17th Amendment comes up. And that's one they try and trick you on. That's the one that made the voting for senators a popular vote. Prior to the 17th Amendment, state legislatures appointed or voted in, however you want to put it, the senators from that state. So they would meet in the state capitol. They would vote for who the senator was. The people didn't vote on this. But in the 17th Amendment, that was changed in order to try and give some power to the people and take some power away from these state governments, which were kind of controlling the Senate a little bit too much. And that one comes up a lot because they'll ask these questions about, prior to, this is something I can almost guarantee you'll say this one tomorrow. Prior to, or let me change that. In the original Constitution, or sometimes they'll say in the Constitution of 1789, which branch of government was elected directly by the people? And the Senate's sitting in there, and we think, gosh, we go vote for senators, so yeah. And then the House of Representatives is in there, we go, yeah, we vote for House of Representatives and the president. Okay, we've got the Electoral College, so that's a buffer, I get that. And then it'll say like the judiciary, and like don't ever say that we vote for the judiciary because we don't. So whenever they state like the original Constitution or the Constitution of 1789 or the Constitution of 1787 or prior to the 17th Amendment, I'm like, they're talking about without the amendments that would apply there. So that's sort of later amendment. 17th Amendment. They will probably ask about the 19th Amendment, which gave the right to vote to women. They will probably, the 22nd and 25th Amendments are like usually in there somewhere. The 22nd Amendment putting the term limits on the president. 25th Amendment creating a succession. And then usually the 26th Amendment is rolled into the voting amendments with the 19th and the 15th, and that set the voting age at 18. If you followed all of that, I know that's a whole lot of stuff to kind of like throw together at one moment. So what's a good way to remember them? You just memorize them. But look, I mean, I was going over an FRQ with my students the other day, and the FRQ kind of asked, describe how one of the following amendments affected the electoral process. Well, obviously, when you see that, you go, electoral process has to do with voting, right? And they listed the 15th and 19th and 26th. And I told them, if you find yourself in that situation, you're going to maybe in your head say, well, I know that one of these probably gave the right to vote to women. If you can't come up with the number, then you kind of take a stab in the dark on that one. Otherwise, you just kind of memorize some amendments and hope that they show up. And that's, I know it's the night before the exam, and that's not the greatest piece of advice, but sometimes familiarity is the most important thing. There's no way to shortcut that I can think of, that I've sort of come up with. Let's see, what else do we have here? Abby wants to know about, Abby wants to know about linkage institutions, but I don't know, Abby, what you want to know about linkage institutions. So if you can sort of clarify that, because that's like 4 entire topics. Hugh wants to know about 4 presidential offices. And again, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking here. So if you guys can clarify that stuff, that would make things a little bit easier here. Haley, predictions or bets on the FRQs? Haley, I'll tell you what, I gave up on that a long time ago. It's impossible to predict what's going to come. It really is. People will go through and they'll look at here's what was asked in the last, 8 years, and they haven't asked about this, so they're going to ask about this. But if you start playing that game, you're going to shortchange yourself, and you're going to overstudy the things that you think might be on it, and you're going to understudy others. I think that you can say this, however. 2 of the FRQs will almost certainly be primarily about the branches of government in some way. They're going to be about Congress, they're going to be about the president, they're going to be about the bureaucracy, they're going to be about the court system, they're going to be about some combination of those. 2 are going to be nailing them. And one of the others is probably going to have it's going to be something that is going to integrate with a branch of government. Maybe it's a question about the media, and the part of it is going to be like how media affects presidential actions or something like that. Or does the media have an effect on judicial decisions or judicial nominations or something like that? But beyond that, I think it's trying to predict it is, there's no basis for doing any of that. So I wish I had a better answer there. Zesty mayonnaise. Whoa. I don't know what just happened here. I just lost my entire feed. So hopefully I was about to answer something, and kind of lost the feed here as we went along. Okay. Iron triangles. Iron triangles are a pretty difficult concept that honestly I just can't explain very well. I can't seem to put it into words in a way that people understand it. Having said that, what you're going to need to know is what an iron triangle is. That's going to be a question. It's probably going to be a multiple choice question. So if you know what an iron triangle is, specifically being a triangle, the 3 things that make up an iron triangle, I think you're probably pretty safe on iron triangles, to be honest with you. And an iron triangle is a congressional committee that deals with a particular policy area. It's interest groups that also deal with that policy area. And then it's any bureaucratic agency that deals with that policy area. So I don't know why I'm on the agriculture thing. I don't know. I'm on agriculture. So if you look at an agriculture thing, then an iron triangle would be, let's say, a farming lobby, like a farming interest group. It would be, the House Committee on Agriculture, and then it would be, the Department of Agriculture. And they all kind of work together to make policy. So that by the time it gets to the floor, if they've come up with a bill, by the time it gets to the floor of the House and the Senate to be voted on, the people who are outside of the Iron Triangle don't know a whole lot about farm policy, and they probably don't care much about it, and so they're going to vote basically as the people who are in the Iron Triangle have sort of said they should vote. And so a lot of times this can result in those three parts making policy. That's really about the best I can do in kind of explaining it. Again, in any way it's kind of it's in any way necessary. Hope's asking a question about the New Deal coalition, which you just don't need to know about, and the Civil Rights Act, which you absolutely do need to know about. Civil Rights Act of 1964, big, huge piece of legislation. This made it illegal to discriminate against people based on race and other protected categories. And kind of was it was the really big culmination of the civil rights movement when the desires of at least the Martin Luther King wing of the civil rights movement, when their desires were really starting to be addressed by the federal government. The federal government was saying, hey, look, you can't discriminate against these people. You can't have segregation. Can't do these sorts of things. That equal protection really is the law of the land, and we're going to back that up with this. And we've had amendments that said this for a long time, but now we're going to kind of do something about it. So it's big to know about it. But things like the New Deal coalition, they're probably not going to show up on the exam in any way that you need to know about them. Kyle's asking about the revolving door with the bureaucracy. This is a problem that comes up sometimes. In fact, Donald Trump put in an executive order about this, one of his very first ones. And there seems to be, there's a conflict of interest that exists, or at least I'm going to say a perceived conflict of interest that exists when people leave elected offices. So you might have someone who was in the Senate, let's say, for like 20 years, right? And then the guy decides he doesn't want to, or the woman decides she doesn't want to work in the Senate anymore. And so, they don't run for re-election. And then an interest group that, that wants to get it like a foot in the door in the Senate says, hey, we'll give you a whole lot of money to come and work for us and lobby the people that you used to work with and the people that you were friends with and the people that you were sort of interacting with on a regular basis and all of that, because my gosh, they're going to trust you more than they're going to trust some guy who we're going to hire off the street. So they give them a lot of money in order to do this. But it brings into the question whether these people have like unfair advantages. If wealthy interest groups that can afford to hire these people are going to have an advantage in policymaking over like less wealthy interest groups that can't afford the big sort of like revolving door kind of thing. There's also and it revolves because it doesn't just go one way. You also have situations where people who are heads of large corporations that deal in some sort of product find themselves being brought into government to regulate that product, and that presents conflict of interest things. And so it's something that people have tried to control for a long time, but haven't really been very good at controlling it. Although, there have been some limitations put on it as you've gone through. Let's see, what else do we have here? Leslie Judith asked, can you please explain the main difference between independent executive agencies and independent regulatory agencies? Rule of thumb, regulatory agencies regulate stuff, especially business. They're going to be there checking to see that the meat is good and not, spoiled. They're going to be there checking emissions. They're going to be there checking banking practices and stuff like that. Those are going to be regulatory agencies because they're going to regulate industry. Independent executive agencies is almost like a catch-all phrase for something that for a part of the bureaucracy that's not a cabinet department and is not a regulatory agency and is not a government corporation. They don't sell things to the people. Pretty much everything else falls into the independent executive agency. They tend to run guess what? Independently, although they're not totally independent. But they're not necessarily regulating the economy, and they're not selling anything to the American people. And so that's sort of your kind of rule of thumb thing. Noah Keith thought of this for the 26th Amendment: add 2 plus 6 to get 18 for the voting age. No, I like the idea there, but man, you got to go back to math class, because 2 plus 6 doesn't equal 18. But I get where you're going. Whatever sticks in your head, it's okay. Let's see. What should we know about Supreme Court justices like the Warren years, Marshall, Berger, etc.? The only thing that I think might show up, Matthew, is the Warren Court. Although, again, like, they really don't tend to go that direction with it and ask about specific courts on the AP exam. The Warren Court is known for being very liberal. They came up with decisions like Gideon versus Wainwright, Miranda versus Arizona, which gave you your Miranda rights. These sort of limitations. They were really big on limiting the government and giving, extending protections to people, especially people who are convicted of crimes and things like that. But it's been a long time since I've seen a question that specifically targeted a Supreme Court justice's court, Let's see. Luke wants to know, is Max Weber's definition of bureaucracy possibly going to be significant tomorrow? It may be. Although, again, it's one of those things, like, it's the classic definition of what a bureaucracy should be, like how it should be organized and efficient and things like that. But the AP exam doesn't tend to really ask questions like that. So do you need to know, do you need to know Weber? Do you need to know his definition of bureaucracy? I would say no. If you're able to recognize it, then you're probably ahead of the game anyway. And you're going to be fine. We are slowly going. Yes, Garrett is all about, yes, the May the 4th be with you. That's great. And it's good. Like, I like that. What else do we have going on here? Can you please explain the main difference between, I already did that. Can you go over how a bill can be killed in Congress? Committees use specifics why the speaker might put a certain bill. Bills can be killed for any reason. Like, number one, it might just be a bad idea. People come up with bad ideas all the time, and they die in committee because they never make it to the main floor. That's what committees are designed to do. You get rid of these horrible ideas. Maybe they're not horrible, or maybe they're just not feasible, or maybe it's the wrong time or something like that. Why can they be killed? Seriously, there's millions of reasons why it might be killed. It might be a bad bill. It might be a bill that isn't going to get support on the floor anyway. So there's no point in bringing it to a vote and sort of wasting everyone's time to vote on something where it's not going to get the support. It might be a bill which is a very partisan bill. If, like right now, the Republicans control both houses of Congress. Very democratic, liberal bills are not going to have an easy time coming out of committees, because the committee chair and the majority of the committee is going to be Republican. And so they're just simply not going to support it. And those sorts of things can be, sort of set aside. So that's how they can be killed in subcommittees. And they're killed in one of two ways. Either they're just voted down, or more often they're just kind of set aside and we're just not even going to vote on it. We're just not even going to deal with this, kind of just sets, keeps getting pushed lower and lower on the to-do list. Think of all the things that you have to do in life. And if you make a list, there are those things which are just never, ever going to get done. And they're sitting way down there, and you're never going to get to them, but you're going to leave them on the list because, you wrote them down at some point. Let's see. Katie is asking about economics for the exam. I don't think you're going to need to know much about economics at all. You might need to know about, sort of budget deficits and how the government spends more money than it brings in. You might need to know something about taxation policy. I've seen this come up a couple of times, and simply understanding progressive taxation, which is that progressive taxation means that as you make more money, it progresses, kind of goes up. The percentage by which theoretically you would pay goes up as you earn more money. Low-income earners are going to pay very small percentages of their wages in income taxes. High-income workers, or the high income, the wealthy, they're going to pay theoretically higher percentages of income tax. And so that's a progressive tax. Outside of that, when you get into things of like policy like this, it gets a little bit too tied up in current events, and these things don't get tested. They are great examples, and when you're writing FRQs, you're going to bring in some of this stuff that you know from having watched the news and followed current events and read examples in your textbook and all that kind of stuff. But they're not really going to be specifically tested because there's no real good way to ensure that every student's been exposed to different policies. It depends on what textbook you're looking at. It depends on what's going on, and so you don't really have to worry about those things as much. William wants to know what are topics that on the FRQ that are often struggled with. I'll tell you, the biggest problem with the FRQs is this, and it's not a topic because, like, I don't know that I have any statistics. I don't know that statistics exist on anything like this. Here's the problem people have with FRQs. The FRQ, in theory, is ridiculously simple. You answer the question. That's all. You just simply answer it. You be very direct. You don't beat around the bush and write some flowery introduction because you're just wasting time. You just answer the question. And oftentimes what happens is that people get writing, you get writing, and you miss the point of what the question was asked. Or what the question asked. And so I always tell students, when you're done answering a portion of the question, take a real brief moment. Look at what you wrote. Look at the prompt or the part of the question that you were trying to answer, and see if you answered it. And read it carefully, because you may have given a great discussion of what executive agreements are. But the question may be something about, how does the way Congress act, or the way Congress make laws, how is that affected by executive agreements? Or how do executive agreements change the way that the Congress does things? And so you didn't really answer it. So that's like the big thing that you got to look out for, is because you're going to be writing these things and you're going to be nervous and just throwing stuff down on paper. You got to take a moment, look back and say, did I answer what was really being asked? And if you didn't, then go back and answer what was being asked, because you probably need to just add a sentence and bam, you've gotten it. So yeah, that would be my big FRQ kind of things. We have a question about the Federalist papers and anti-Federalist papers being on the test. The Federalist papers usually they'll only ask about one, okay? They're only going to ask about Federalist 10. I can't think of a situation where they asked about another one in specifically. Federalist 10 is all about, where James Madison is laying out the justification behind the separation of powers and checks and balances. And, this problem that he had, that factions were the biggest issue that would face this new republic. Groups would come together and they would band together and they could become very powerful. And it's only through this system of checks and balances and separation of powers that the power of these factions can be controlled. You don't want to eliminate them, because you gotta have freedom to participate. That's what the whole system is based on. But you want to be able to limit their ability to take over all of the government. And so that's really big. The anti-Federalist papers are not going to show up, but the Anti-Federalist arguments will. And really, the biggest argument that you're going to want to know about with the Anti-Federalists is their belief that there needed to be more limitations on the power of the federal government. They wanted a Bill of Rights. They got it. I mean, we know that. But their argument was that if you don't the argument of the Federalists, let me start there. The argument of the Federalists was that the federal government only has the powers that they've outlined in the Constitution. Like, they sat there, they wrote them down. Like, right here, it's right in writing. If we didn't write it down, the federal government doesn't have that power. And the Anti-Federalists said, somewhere along the line, someone's going to come along and they're going to find a way to get more power using the words of the Constitution that goes beyond the scope of what we've given them inside of the Constitution. And, well, they were right. The elastic clause, that necessary and proper clause, and the commerce clause, they give these broad powers that Congress can use to get a lot more power. And so the Anti-Federalists said, we absolutely, positively, 100% need a Bill of Rights that limits the power of the federal government. And so, in order to win ratification in Virginia and in New York, the Federalists had to agree that they would make creating a Bill of Rights the first thing that this new Congress was going to do. So that's the important thing that you need to know there. Let's see. All right, Jillian is asking about the discretionary authority of bureaucracy. I've talked about this a little bit earlier, but bureaucratic discretion comes up a lot on FRQs, so I'll give it another minute. Bureaucratic agencies have a lot of leeway in how they implement policy. And you can take any single agency and decide and say, like, okay, well, how is it that they have leeway? Let's choose NASA, right? So NASA is like, they're going to be funded by Congress. They have a general directive and stuff like that. But like how they decide, that on Wednesday we're going to launch this satellite, or maybe we're not going to launch because the weather's wrong, or we're going to contract with this company to, rather than make the jet fuel or the rocket fuel ourselves, we're going to contract with Exxon Mobil, and they're going to manufacture that. And all of these little decisions that the bureaucracy is going to make, that they have to make, is bureaucratic discretion. The reason they have the discretion is because Congress can't sit around and spend all their time, nor can the president spend all his time trying to make all these decisions, which are, they're not minor decisions, but I mean, they can't be made by those, by Congress and the president, because they got other things going on. So that's within the scope of the bureaucracy to be able to decide those things. Let's see. Okay, I think I'm caught up here. I'm moving along here. Go through how each branch can check each other, please. Anderson is asking that. I think, honestly, this is a really good thing to do. Your textbook, and if for some reason you don't have a textbook, which you should, but if you don't have a textbook, like, Google it, right? Checks and balances. You're going to end up seeing some triangle graph. Just look at it, read it, and look, because that's incredibly important in terms of understanding how the system of checks and balances works. There's a lot of checks and balances built in, and for me to list them here would probably be a little bit of overkill. But if you find that little chart and you sort of look at it, you're going to get a really good understanding of the checks that are on it in very basic ways. I'll give a couple of examples for each one. Okay. The president can check the power of the judiciary by implementation of their decisions. If the judicial branch says that something is unconstitutional and needs to be stopped, then the executive branch has to go out and stop it. And if they don't, that's a check on their power. The federal government, or sorry, the president is also in charge of nominating judges that sit on the federal benches of all the federal courts. That can change the makeup of them, especially if they start appointing judges who agree with their political philosophy. The president can check the power of the of Congress by vetoing legislation. That's sort of an obvious one. Congress can check the power of the president by overriding a veto of that. They can check his power of appointment by refusing to confirm the appointments that he's made. They can check his power to make treaties if they don't ratify the treaty. There's a lot of like advice and consent stuff in there. They can check the power of the courts, because if the court decides a law is unconstitutional, Congress can rewrite the same law and reword it to make it to make it work, so that it's not covered by the Supreme Court decision. Or they could simply propose a constitutional amendment that would override the judicial branch's override of the law. If you follow the logic there, it's getting late. Judicial branch can check the power of the president by making any of his executive orders unconstitutional and blocking them from being enforced. The recent travel ban was an executive order put out by President Trump, and the judicial branch went in and said that this is a violation of the 14th Amendment. I think they were using 14th Amendment arguments, and saying of equal protection, and so they blocked it from happening. They sort of overrode it, and they can do the same thing with the with bills, laws coming out of the legislature, so that they so those laws can't be implemented. They're unconstitutional. They're out. And then I'm going to give Matthew another one, because this is one that's really good, and I think it'll show up. Superdelegates. And it's misunderstood. Superdelegates have to do with the primary election process. Prior to the general election, where you have like party against party, and again, it's good to phrase this stuff in current events if you can. So think Clinton-Trump, right? That's the general election. But leading up to that, the Republicans had to figure out who their nominee was going to be, and the Democrats had to figure out who their nominee was going to be. And so they went through a series of primaries in every state and every territory in the U.S. It was a series of primary elections, direct primaries, they're called. And through that process, the people chose who the nominee was going to be. Well, in the Republican system of doing things, that's exactly how it works. Every primary election has proportional votes. Boy, this is getting a little confusing. Every primary election is going to send people to the national convention based on the popular vote for different candidates. Okay, and the one person who gets the most will be the one who's the nominee. The Democrats do the same thing, but they threw in like a safeguard, and they threw in these superdelegates. Now, this came up during the last election because there was a lot of talk about how Donald Trump, who was rather like unpopular with the Republican Party, especially the establishment during the primary process, would have had a much harder time getting nominated as a Democrat, because these superdelegates, they don't have to answer to the people. They're not elected by the people to go and represent the people's views. They're there to represent the party. And they're like former presidents, former governors, former senators, all of that. And they have autonomy to back whoever they want to. And so throughout the primary process, there was this rising surge in the Democratic Party of Bernie Sanders, and everybody was feeling the burn there, and he was gaining a lot of momentum. But he almost had, he had such a difficult race to run, because he not only had to beat Hillary Clinton's straight up numbers in primaries, but he also had to overcome all of the superdelegates, because they all wanted her. I think there were like 3 that were going to vote for Bernie Sanders. So he had to overcome them. But that was the Democratic Party saying, we got a better chance of winning with Hillary Clinton than we do with Bernie Sanders. And there was a lot of speculation that, if the Republican Party had superdelegates, that Donald Trump never would have gotten a nomination, because the superdelegates who were looking out for the Republican Party would never have gone with him. Now, right or wrong, I mean, who knows? But that was a lot of the talk. So that's what superdelegates are out there. Let's see if we've got someone that we haven't heard from a lot here. All right, Logan Gordy's asking the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. There were a number of them. A confederation is just like every state was its own country, basically, and they all formulated their own laws, and they all created their own policies, and yeah, that was a bad situation. Any one of them could declare war on other ones. Any state could declare war on like France if they wanted to, but the biggest number one problem with the Articles of Confederation was that it didn't have the power to tax. Like, the states would tax the people, and then they would voluntarily donate to the Confederation government. And if they didn't, there was no thing in place that would cause them to do that. So that was like the biggest weakness. Now compound that with the fact that the Confederation government couldn't change it. If they wanted to make any change to the Articles of Confederation themselves, every single state would have to agree to this. So think about this for a second. The government, this Confederation government, has no power to tax the people. And in order to get that power to tax the people and not let the states tax the people, all of the states have to agree to not be the ones to tax the people at their own discretion, that not federal, but this Confederation government would do that. And it wasn't going to happen, Make even more than that, the federal government, there was no executive, so there was little way to carry out or enforce any laws that they made. And there was no judiciary, so if people lived in different states, or if states had problems with one another, there was no way to settle this, because there were no federal courts like we have today where this could be done. If Georgia had a beef with South Carolina, where are you going to hold the court case? Georgia or South Carolina? That's pretty important, because wherever you hold the court case, they're probably going to win. So that's why they came together and they said, we got to fix this stuff. And really, the Constitution was a response to, you can draw lines. Maybe you did this early in the year. You can really draw lines between this was a problem, and bam, they put a solution into the Constitution, which kind of worked as we go along through here. Oh my goodness. Tell you what, I'm going to take about 2 more questions, and then I'm going to bow out as well, because you guys need to go to bed. You need to get some sleep, but I also need to go to bed and get some sleep, because I'm going to be up early with my students here. So I'll take a couple here. Here's a good one: the incumbency advantage. The incumbency advantage is really important. We're talking about not presidential elections, but congressional elections here. So people who are in office already, incumbents who are running for re-election, have massive advantages. Number one, they're going to get a whole lot more money donated to them. Political action committees, interest groups, all these groups which are going to back candidates, they want to back sure things. And so in a way, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. They get elected more often because people are willing to give them more money, because they know that they get reelected more often, but they're also kind of sure bets. If I'm running a PAC here and I've got $100,000 that I want to donate to candidates, I don't want to donate to someone who's unproven and is trying to get into Congress, when I can donate to people who are in Congress who have a record of voting for things that I support. I can look right at their voting record and say, look, if I'm an educator, and I really value schools, and I see that I got this $100,000, and I look through and I have people who have long voting records of voting for education and funding education, helping education, all that, I'm going to give them money, and that's going to help them win. But they also have name recognition, people who are running for re-election, the people simply know their names. And so, and I hate to say this because it's kind of not the ideal democracy that you'd love to think about. But when the average American goes to vote at the polls, average American, it doesn't necessarily know the name of their congressional representative. They might not know the names of their senators. So, but they're going to recognize those names probably more than some other person they've honestly never heard of. And so, there are a lot of people who line up in voting booths and they sit there and say, well, I've heard of this person, so I'm voting for them. So name recognition is big. They also sort of get backed. It's really hard. They have voting, or they have records of maybe voting records to stand on, but they also have legislative records that can say, hey, look what I've done for you as a district. While I've been in office, I've given you, we got all that money from FEMA after the flood, and and I've brought jobs to the district by getting a military base built here, whatever. And they can sit there and they can do what's called credit claiming and say, like, I've done this. And they're also more likely to get endorsed by the party. The party is going to be more likely to jump up against them, to the point where if you have someone who's a very strong candidate from a party who's running for re-election, oftentimes they're not even the other party doesn't even put up an opposition. They run completely unopposed because it's pretty much a done deal. My representative, Charlie Dent, ran unopposed in the last election. Democrats didn't put anyone up against him because they kind of figured, like, they're not going to win. So there's a lot of advantages to being an incumbent. And so their re-election rates are ridiculously high, which gives them more advantage because people look and they go, like, hey, their election rates are really high. So that's, it's kind of a done deal. All right, Sammy, I wonder what a Gov Tester in Trump era is going to look like at the College Board. Pull something fun, spice it up. You're not going to see the name Trump on this thing. You really won't, unless you write it. Seriously. Because the College Board doesn't like current events, and they especially don't like things which are developing. The danger in writing a test like this is that if you get too entwined in things which are in the mix, you run the risk of having them change between the time that the test is written and like printed and the time that people take it. And then you're in a bad situation because all of a sudden, you've written this thing, which is, like, you found a correct answer or something, maybe it's a multiple choice. And then, like, now 2 of the answers are actually correct. And you're really in kind of a bad situation. So I don't think you're going to see anything about Trump or Clinton or Bernie Sanders. You're not going to see any of that stuff in there. But if you've been following current events, and I've said this before, you can use the information of current events as ways to back up what you know on FRQs. And that's my advice, use an example whenever you can to back up what you know on an FRQ, because it'll sort of like help you out in terms of pushing you right over the top. All right, it's 10:30. I'm going to go ahead and call this a night. Let me just say this. As you guys get ready for this thing, get a good night's sleep, eat a good breakfast, go in confident. And when you attack this test, go in with the knowledge that you've been working at this for a really long time. And if you really are concerned about doing well, concerned enough that you're sitting here watching me talk about this stuff, you're probably okay on the AP exam. You're probably going to do all right. And so you need to be confident in the fact that you're going to do all right. And, if it helps, the questions that you're asking, they're at a complexity level that shows me that you're going to be all right. If you're sitting here asking me about, who is the president, or like what's a constitution? We got some issues. But when you're asking me stuff like you've been asking me, which are really, really good questions, it shows that the main concepts you've got down, and you're trying to fine tune. And if you're in the fine tune situation, you're going to do great. So go out there tomorrow, sit down, and if you need to, right before you take the test, take a deep breath. Tell yourself, you know this stuff. You're going to do great. And there's one other thing to remember. No one ever gets 100% on this thing. That's not true. Maybe in a year, like 1 or 2 people out of the how many hundreds of thousands that take it get a perfect score. So if you miss some, so does everybody else. All right. So with that thought, thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for asking some great questions. It's been a whole lot of fun. And take time to subscribe to my channel, and take time to tell other people about the channel. And if you are by any chance taking AP Euro as well, boy, you're going to see a lot of me over the next week. So have yourselves a great night. Get some sleep. Do well on that exam. And please send me a message and let me know how you think you did. All right. Good night, everybody.